I just got done watching Transformers Rise of the Beast, and overall, I found this movie to be enjoyable, but kind of forgettable. We're going to talk all about that, but I think the thing a lot of people are wondering is, first off, there's a brand new Transformers movies in theaters. Yeah, and it's about Optimus Prime and the Autobots who take on their biggest challenge yet. When a new threat capable of destroying the entire planet emerges, they must team up with a powerful faction of Transformers known as the Maximals to save Earth. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't excited for this, because the director Stephen Cable Jr. was going to be directing this. He did Creed 2. I was very impressed with that. Anthony Ramos was going to be starring as the main character. A big fan of him from In the Heights, and as well as Dominique Fishback was also going to be in this. Really like her in every single role she's ever shown up in. And I gotta admit, I'm disappointed. Now, do I think this is a bad movie? No. Do I think there's bad elements to it? Yes. Did I expect some of those? Absolutely, but what I was happy with did outweigh a lot of the cons. I just found this film to overall be a mixed bag, and that's going to be different for every single one of you out there, specifically you Transformers fans. Now, I think it's fair to give a little bit of background context to how I feel on the entire Transformers live action movie franchise as a whole, as well as just kind of a quick how do I feel about Transformers. Because that's kind of the gist of this. If you're a massive Transformers fan, someone who grew up with the Beast, grew up with the Maximals and everything of that nature, you're probably going to really like this movie. If you're someone who didn't grow up with that, but kind of just grew up liking Transformers, I think you'll find some instances to this. If you absolutely hate all the Michael Bay stuff, this will probably be a little bit more of your cup of tea. But if you're someone who did like some of the Michael Bay stuff, primarily the first 3 films of his, then I think you might find yourself a little bit disappointed in some categories. Now, I'm going to talk about that because for me, I grew up with that original Transformers Michael Bay film. That film was came out at the perfect time in my life. I absolutely love that movie. I understand all of its issues. I just rewatched it. I'll be doing a Transformers ranking later this week for including Rise of the Beast, so look forward to that. The second movie, growing up, I liked it, but again, watching it now, it is a mess, but I enjoy it for what it is. The third film I thought was awesome. The fourth film, I'll save that for my ranking, but the fifth film was awful. The Last Night is one of the worst blockbusters I've ever seen in my entire life. Then Bumblebee came around, and this is at the point where I'm done with these live-action Transformers films, and that film turned it around. I really loved Bumblebee. It kind of reminded me of Iron Giant. It had a heart and a soul to it all. And when it comes down to just Transformers in general, I love a lot of the animated stuff, primarily the 1980s Transformers animated film. That film is awesome, and even though it's bad in some departments, it's also still great. Rise of the Beast, I was kind of going into this expecting a fun action thrill ride, and I think there's a lot of pros to it, like I mentioned. But there's also a lot of mistakes that the film decided to make again, and overall, I kind of just walked away thinking I'm probably not going to remember this in a couple of days. And it actually kind of makes me appreciate the Michael Bay films a little bit more, at least the first 3, primarily because of what he's able to do with a lot of the transformations and some of the action there. And we're going to talk all about that. But if you are new here, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button for more. I definitely want to hear your guys' thoughts down below, because if you're a massive Transformers fan, please let me know what your thoughts are on Rise of the Beast, and primarily what your thoughts are on the entire live-action franchise, and what's also your favorite Transformers. Let's start that discussion down below. Every movie review, I do like starting to talk about the pros, so let's get that out of the way. First off, I gotta give major credit to the entire film, because this is finally the first time where I felt that there was a perfect balance between humans and Transformers. Both get enough screen time to develop both to a certain ideology and as well as continue and impress me, where I felt like Bumblebee still couldn't find that mix, and that's mostly because Bumblebee is mainly the only Transformer in that film. I just was really impressed with how this film was actually able to split apart both the runtimes and actually not make the pacing lack on that, where no matter what fan of you for the Michael Bay films are, there's way too much human interactions in those movies, and I think if it would have focused more on the Transformers, then those films would be primarily remembered a little bit better. Rise of the Beast itself, though, does find that perfect balance, and I was very impressed with that, to say the least. That doesn't mean that the human characters in here are the best. We'll talk about that soon, but I do think Anthony Ramos does do a good job in here, and he is a very likable character. Dominique Fishback is also very likable as well. They don't do enough with the characters, but they do just enough for me to enjoy them. The reason we do come to these movies is because of the Transformers. It's not because of the human interactions, unless you're one of those weird people. I could care less about any of the humans in any of the Transformers films or shows, and I have to say that a lot of the Transformers stuff in here is a lot of fun. Do I think the transformations could have been a little bit better? Sure. I'm really big fan of how Michael Bay actually did the transforming and the visual effects look of that all. But I did find that the action in here kind of was resembling how that early Cybertron Bumblebee scene was at the start of Bumblebee. I was impressed by that, and I was like, I want more of this, and you get a lot of that throughout this entire movie, primarily in the third act itself. I think there's an argument to be made that the third act of this film is some of the best third acts that we've seen of a Transformers film. I don't love the location of the final battle, but I overall do dig the way that the action is shot, the way that the camera is moved around, and again, it does bring this fun intensity to it all. But that word intensity can kind of be thrown around loosely a bit, because while it is intense at the most part, I also just think it's fun. It's like kind of like you reminiscing, you going back to playing with your Transformers toys and throwing them together and having them fight each other, and that's kind of what that final battle sequence felt like. It's badass because as much as your imagination can explore that, it's fun. I can't lie, but I think it was shot very well. It was edited nicely too. See every single thing going on, and that is something that I even think some of the Michael Bay films have some issues with at times. I also have to give a shout out. I thought it was a nice choice to place this in the 90s, primarily because of the soundtrack that you're able to use, as well as the vibe of filmmaking at that point in time. And you can really feel that this is kind of a movie that would have been made in the 90s if you had the technological power to make it that way. Last but not least, the last thing I do want to mention about, of course, the Transformers itself is I actually really like how they explored Optimus Prime as a leader. There's a lot to be said about how Optimus Prime has been a leader, and some people I've actually read in some forums and communities think he's not that great of a leader. And you actually get to see kind of some development on there, and specifically how other Transformers may feel about him, specifically Optimal Prime, who I thought was awesome, and Ron Perlman does an amazing job as this CGI visual effects transforming gorilla. I absolutely dug the hell out of that. I think the Maximals overall are a big standout of this entire movie. I, again, think they're used better than how the Dinobots were used in the Michael Bay Transformers films, but I want more of them. I hope to God that we get to see more of them in the future. Again, seeing that development with the Transformers was actually something pretty great, because honestly, out of all the Michael Bay films and even the Bumblebee film, we never really got depth to these Transformers characters. We just knew, oh yeah, that's Optimus Prime, he's the leader, oh, that's Bumblebee. You actually kind of do feel for all the characters, and I cared more about the Transformers in this film than I ever have. Speaking of the story, that is where my issue mainly lies within this film, and I know not everyone goes to the Transformers movies for stories. I really don't. But at times when you're watching it, it can be pretty distracting. And a lot of that actually just comes down to all the exposition. They made me feel like I was a 5-year-old having to be explained every little tidbit. And say what you will about the Michael Bay films, I've never thought that they gave too much exposition. They gave enough, and they absolutely have way too many characters and way too many subplots and way too many things going on. That's completely entirely different discussion. This film might have a lot of shit going on, might not have a ton of different subplots, a ton of different characters, thank God, but it's still exposition heavy. It still sits there, and it wants you to feel for every single second, and every line of dialogue, it always felt like the characters were having to explain what was going on when I already understood what was going on. Exposition's okay, but it always depends on how you deliver it. And I didn't think they delivered it too well. I did like the thematics that they were able to do with the Autobots and the Maximals itself. I thought, again, that was interesting, but everything else was very, very, very tiresome, and honestly made the film drag considerably until we finally got to the next action scene, and that's when I started having a little bit more fun. Other than that, the story was very disappointing. I also mentioned this when I was talking about the action, the intensity of it all. I will be honest, I didn't really feel the stakes in this movie when it comes down to building up the villain, to building up what these characters needed to do. I understood it, I just didn't really care, and again, maybe that does all pertain back to the story itself. I think this movie just has so many different ideas that it wanted to explore in so many different parts of the Transformers world that it really wants us to latch onto, but I think in the end of the day, it kind of just ends up losing its steam halfway through. This film feels more of a priority of trying to set up things for the future and get you excited for those than primarily focusing on the film itself. I think overall, Transformers Rise of the Beast has an issue with focus and focusing in on the film that you primarily have right now. Lot of awesome action sequences, like the new characters. Don't love them, but I like the new characters a lot better than Mark Wahlberg was in the last 2 Transformers films. And at the same point in time, I love what they did with the Transformers in here, specifically like the Autobots, the Maximals, and the development that they actually gave. I thought this was the best written one for that part of the story. But everything else of the story is a mess. It's forgettable, and it gets in the way of a lot of things, because Transformers Rise of the Beast is the equivalent of looking back at your childhood when you would grab all your action figures. It's fun, it's amusing, and it's enjoyable, but that's about it. I really think the third action set piece, though, is up there with Bumblebee's opening action scene, but I found this film to be a complete mixed bag. I like the balance of the humans and the Transformers, but they almost had it. It's just, why did they have to explain so much? I'm just so confused by that. And don't even get me started on the goddamn ending of this movie. It's not terrible, but I understand why they're doing it. I'm going to leave it at that. It's not something that's going to ruin the movie, but it's just more of like, what? Why? It makes sense, but I'm just, why? With all that said, I'm going to give Transformers Rise of the Beast a C+. Let me know down below what your guys' thoughts are on the movie. I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts. Look forward to my Transformers movie ranking coming soon. And of course, until next time, stay classy.